morning sun rose slowly over the small town, painting the streets with its soft golden light. Yet for the young woman sitting in the corner of a dusty courtyard, there was no brightness in her life.
Her name was Alina. For as long as she could remember, she had been treated as if she were not a person at all but something far less.
Her hands and feet were bound with old iron chains that had left marks on her skin. Every sound of those chains clinking reminded her of the life she had been forced to live, one filled with pain, shame, and silence. She sat quietly, her eyes lowered to the ground, not daring to look up at those who passed by. People often walked past her, some giving her cruel glances, others ignoring her as if she did not exist. She had become invisible to the world, a shadow of a human being. Inside her heart there was still a faint spark of dignity, but it was buried under years of harsh treatment. She had been made to believe she was worth nothing, and in time she almost began to believe it. The townspeople would sometimes laugh at her situation. They whispered among themselves, saying she was too broken to stand, too weak to survive, too useless to matter. They pointed fingers and called her names, each word cutting like a knife. Alina never answered back. Her silence was her only shield. The more she stayed quiet, the more people thought she had no soul left. But deep inside, she still carried memories of a better time, long ago when she was free, when her laughter filled the air, when she was treated with love and care. But those days were gone, replaced by endless mornings and nights of misery. Each day was the same. She would sit in the courtyard or be dragged into the marketplace where people came to buy or sell goods. To them, she was not a person. She was a sight, an example, something to be mocked. Even children were taught to look at her with disdain, throwing small stones in her direction while adults chuckled. The sound of laughter hurt her more than the stones did. Despite all this, Alina never let her tears fall in public. She had cried enough in the darkness of her nights where nobody could see or hear her. She learned that showing pain gave power to those who hurt her. So she wore a mask of emptiness, looking down at the dirt, keeping her voice locked inside. Still, her heart cried every day for freedom, for kindness, for someone to see her not as dirt but as a human being. The seasons changed, but her condition never did. Rain poured on her shoulders in the cold months, and the burning summer sun made her dizzy and weak. Her clothes were torn and her body thin, but no one offered her shelter. Some people even said she deserved this life, though no one could explain why. It was easier for them to believe she was worthless than to admit their cruelty. Alina dreamed often. When the nights grew long and she closed her eyes against the rough ground, her mind drifted to a place where chains did not exist. She dreamed of running barefoot across wide-open fields, of feeling the wind against her face, of hearing kind voices call her name. In those dreams, she was not a prisoner. She was alive, free, and full of light. But every morning, when the first sound of her chains broke the silence, reality struck her again. The dream would vanish, leaving her weaker than before. On this particular day, the marketplace was busier than usual. Merchants had gathered from nearby villages, their colorful stalls filled with fruits, spices, fabrics, and trinkets. The air was filled with shouts of bargaining and laughter. For most, it was a lively, happy scene, but for Alina, it was another day of humiliation. She was forced to sit at the corner near the entrance where everyone could see her. The man who controlled her thought it would bring him attention, and perhaps even money if someone were foolish enough to spend it on her. As she sat there, she heard voices rise above the crowd. "Look at her," one man said with a mocking tone. "She cannot even lift her head anymore. Useless creature." Another laughed, adding, "No one will ever take her. She will rot there until the end of her days." Their words were cruel, but Alina did not flinch. She kept her gaze low, her fingers digging into the dirt. If she looked at them, if she showed her feelings, they would only mock her more. Hours passed and the sun grew hotter. Sweat trickled down her face, but no one offered her water. Her throat felt dry, her lips cracked, but she sat in silence. She had grown used to hunger and thirst, though her body cried for relief. At times she thought about giving up, about closing her eyes and never waking up. But something deep inside always pulled her back. It was faint, but it was there. A belief that life might change one day, that her story was not meant to end this way. From where she sat, she could see the world moving around her. Families walking together, merchants smiling as they sold goods, children chasing one another with laughter. It was a cruel reminder of the life she was missing, a life she once had but lost. Still, she watched quietly, memorizing their faces, their happiness, as if to hold on to the proof that such joy existed somewhere, even if not for her. As the day dragged on, Alina's body ached from the weight of the chains. Her wrists were sore and her ankles were swollen. She shifted slightly, trying to ease the pain, but the chains rattled loudly, drawing attention. A group of young boys noticed and began mocking her, mimicking the sound of chains and laughing loudly. She closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. Every insult felt like fire, but she knew she could not fight back. She had no strength left for anger, and yet in her silence she carried strength others could not see. The fact that she survived each day despite the cruelty was proof of her resilience. She had been pushed down again and again, but still she breathed, still her heart beat, still her eyes open to see another day. Her spirit, though wounded, was not destroyed. That afternoon, as the sun began to sink lower, the crowd in the market shifted slightly. People turned their heads toward the entrance as a new figure walked in. Alina, though tired, sensed the change. She did not know it yet, but this moment was the beginning of something that would alter her fate forever. For now, she remained in her corner, silent, chained, and unseen. But the winds of change had already begun to stir. The marketplace was filled with noise and movement, yet among the shouts of merchants and the laughter of children, one figure stood out without even trying. He was a tall man with steady steps, his presence quiet but strong. His clothes were simple, showing he was a traveler who had come a long way, but there was something about him that made people move aside without being asked. His eyes were sharp yet kind, and his manner carried a weight of confidence. His name was Daniel, though no one in the town knew him yet. Daniel walked into the market as if searching for something beyond the goods laid out on the stalls. He passed by baskets of apples, piles of spices, and rolls of bright cloth without stopping. His gaze moved across the crowd until it reached the far corner of the courtyard, where Alina sat in her chains. At first, he simply paused. The sight of her, sitting in silence with her head bowed, touched something deep inside him. Unlike the others, he did not see a worthless person sitting in the dirt. He saw a human being crushed under cruelty, a soul waiting for light. He noticed the marks on her wrists where the iron rubbed against her skin, the faint trembling of her body in the heat, and the silence she wore like armor. His heart tightened and he felt a rush of anger, not at her but at the way she had been treated. As Daniel stopped to look, a few townspeople nearby noticed. One of them, a merchant with a loud voice, chuckled and said, "Stranger, don't waste your time. She's not worth a glance. Look at her, broken and useless." His words drew laughter from others. Daniel did not laugh. Instead, he turned his calm eyes toward the man and asked, "If she is so worthless, why do you keep her here in chains for everyone to see?" His voice was firm but even, the kind that carried authority without needing to shout. The merchant frowned, surprised that someone would challenge him. "Because that's all she's good for," he said quickly, avoiding Daniel's gaze. A reminder that not everyone deserves freedom. No one would want her anyway. Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked back at Alina. She had not lifted her head, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. She had heard every word. He wondered how many times she had listened to such cruelty, how many days she had survived by keeping her silence. Slowly, Daniel walked closer to where she sat. The crowd grew curious and followed his movement with their eyes. A few whispered, some smirked, expecting him to join in the mockery. But instead he crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to Alina's level. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not from above but with respect. "Can you hear me?" Daniel asked softly. His voice was steady, not pitying, but kind. Alina did not respond. Her instinct told her to stay silent. Many had spoken to her before, but only to insult her. Words had never brought her comfort. She kept her eyes on the ground, waiting for the harshness that always followed. Daniel studied her quietly, then said, "You don't need to answer. I just want you to know I see you." Those words, so simple, broke through the wall she had built inside herself. Her heart gave a painful throb. She wanted to believe them, but fear told her not to. She had learned long ago that hope could be dangerous. Still, for the first time, she felt noticed. The crowd grew restless. "Leave her," one man shouted. "She's not worth your attention." Another added, "If you're looking for someone to serve you, buy a worker who can actually stand." Daniel ignored them. He turned to the man who controlled Alina and asked, "How much?" The marketplace fell into silence for a moment. People stared at him in disbelief. The man controlling Alina blinked in surprise before bursting into laughter. "You want her? You must be out of your mind," he said. "You're not the first stranger to pity her, but you'll be the first fool to spend anything on her. She can't work. She's broken. She's nothing." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "How much?" he repeated, his eyes steady. The man hesitated. He did not think anyone would actually want her. Still, he named a price, expecting the stranger to walk away. 2 silver coins, he said with a smirk, certain the amount would sound too high for what he called dirt. Without a second thought, Daniel reached into his pouch and placed the coins in the man's hand. The clinking sound silenced the laughter around them. The crowd had expected him to argue or leave, but instead he paid without hesitation. The man stared at the money in disbelief, then shrugged, handing over the key to the chains. "She's yours now. Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered. Daniel took the key and walked over to Alina. His hands moved gently as he unlocked the chains around her wrists and ankles. The metal dropped to the ground with a heavy clang. For Alina, the sound was like thunder. She had carried those chains for so long that the sudden freedom felt unreal. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes wide with shock. She could not understand why this stranger had done such a thing. She expected a trick, some hidden cruelty, but Daniel simply looked at her with calm kindness. "You're free now," he said quietly. Alina's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. She had forgotten how to form them in moments like this. Her heart raced, torn between fear and hope. She waited for the cruelty to return, but it didn't. Instead, Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread and a flask of water. He held them out to her, not forcing, just offering. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bread. She ate slowly, her body weak but grateful. Each bite was like a miracle. The water cooled her dry throat and tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She quickly turned her face away, ashamed of showing weakness, but Daniel did not mock her. The crowd continued to murmur, some shaking their heads, others whispering about the foolish stranger. But Daniel ignored them all. His focus was only on the woman before him who sat unsure of what freedom meant. "Stand if you can," he said gently. "Don't worry. I won't leave you." Her legs were stiff, unused to standing without chains. She wobbled, nearly falling, but Daniel reached out and steadied her with a steady hand. For the first time in years, she stood on her own feet. The crowd gasped, for many believed she could not. Daniel gave her a small nod as if to say, "See, you are stronger than they think." Alina looked at him, truly looked, her eyes searching his face for any sign of cruelty. But she found none. His eyes were clear, filled not with pity but with quiet respect. The marketplace returned to its noise, but something had changed. For Alina, the world that had always seemed dark now held a single light. She did not yet understand who this man was or why he had chosen to free her, but she felt the first stirrings of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. And for Daniel, it was only the beginning. He had seen injustice, and he could not walk away from it. The choice he made in that moment would shape both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The marketplace slowly returned to its rhythm after the strange event, but the whispers never stopped. People shook their heads, pointing at Daniel and Alina as if they had just witnessed the most foolish act of the day. Some laughed quietly, others murmured in disbelief. To them, Daniel had wasted his money on someone who could never repay him. Yet Daniel did not care about their opinions. His concern was only for the fragile figure beside him. Alina stood on unsteady legs, her thin frame trembling as though every breath took effort. The sudden freedom from the chains left her body weak and her mind confused. She looked around with wide eyes, half expecting someone to call her back, to fasten the chains again. But Daniel stood near her, tall and steady, a silent shield between her and the world. "Take your time," he said gently. His voice was calm, not hurried, and his tone carried a quiet strength that reassured her. She tried to take a step but faltered. Her knees bent and she nearly stumbled to the ground. Before she could fall, Daniel caught her arm. His touch was firm but respectful, not forceful. She looked up at him in surprise, and for a moment their eyes met. It was the first time in years someone had touched her without cruelty. He guided her to a shaded spot near the edge of the marketplace, away from the eyes of the crowd. There he set down his small satchel and pulled out a cloth, a small loaf of bread, and a flask of water. He broke the bread into smaller pieces and handed them to her. "Eat slowly," he said. "You've been without for too long." Alina hesitated. She was not used to kindness. Suspicion filled her thoughts. Why would a stranger care for her? Why would he give away his food? She had learned long ago that kindness often carried hidden traps. Still, her hunger was stronger than her doubt. She took the bread with trembling hands, nibbling carefully as though afraid it might vanish. The taste was simple, but to her, it was a gift greater than gold. Each bite warmed her body. Each swallow reminded her she was still alive. Daniel watched quietly, making sure she did not choke in her haste. When she drank from the flask, water trickled down her chin, but she felt a comfort she hadn't known in years. When she had eaten enough, she sat back against the wall, her body still trembling but her eyes calmer. She whispered, her voice barely audible, Why did you do this?" Daniel did not answer right away. He looked out at the busy marketplace, then back at her. "Because no one deserves chains," he said simply. "Not you, not anyone." His words struck her deeply. She lowered her gaze, unable to believe someone could think that way. For years, she had been told she was worthless, unfit for freedom, and now this man was saying the opposite. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clung to her heart. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and Daniel knew they could not stay in the marketplace forever. "Come," he said gently. "Let's get you away from here." She hesitated, her feet frozen. "Away?" she whispered, fear in her tone. "Yes," he nodded. "You don't belong here. You deserve a chance to live in peace." His words were kind, but to Alina, leaving the place she had known, even in chains, was frightening. The world outside was unknown, and she had been taught that freedom was dangerous. She looked at the ground unsure until Daniel extended his hand. He did not force her. He only offered. After a long pause, she placed her fragile hand into his. Together they walked out of the marketplace. The crowd parted, some laughing, others shaking their heads. "Fool," one man shouted. "She'll only slow you down." Another mocked. "Wait until you realize you've carried home nothing but a burden." Daniel did not reply. His silence was stronger than their insults. Alina, however, flinched at every word. Shame pressed heavy on her, but Daniel's steady steps gave her a strange sense of safety. They walked through the streets until they reached the edge of town, where the noise faded into the quiet of open fields. Daniel led her to a small shelter he used when traveling. A simple hut made of wood and stone with a fire pit in the middle. It was not much, but it was warm and safe. For Alina, it felt like another world compared to the cold corner of the marketplace. He set her down near the fire and lit it, the flames glowing softly as the night approached. The warmth spread quickly, and Alina closed her eyes, breathing it in. She had not felt warmth like this in so long. Daniel prepared a simple meal from dried meat and vegetables, placing a portion in front of her. She hesitated again, unused to being offered anything. "Why do you feed me?" she asked softly. "Because you need it," Daniel replied, "and because it is right." The simplicity of his answer puzzled her. Most people demanded something in return, but this man asked for nothing. She ate slowly, her eyes occasionally lifting to watch him. He moved with quiet confidence, not boastful, not cruel. There was no hidden trick in his actions. He truly seemed to care. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Daniel gave her a blanket and told her to rest. She lay down near the fire, her heart racing. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind battled between fear and hope. She wondered if he would change in the morning, if this kindness was only temporary. Yet as she glanced at him sitting nearby, keeping watch, she felt a strange comfort. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes without fear of harm. The next morning, when sunlight entered the hut, Alina woke to the sound of birds. She sat up slowly, surprised that no harsh voice demanded her to move. No chains bound her. Daniel was outside gathering water from a nearby stream. When he returned, he greeted her with a small smile. "Good morning," he said. The words were ordinary, yet to her they felt extraordinary. No one had spoken to her that way in so long. She looked at him with cautious eyes, but managed a faint nod. The days that followed were filled with small but powerful changes. Daniel taught her how to wash her wounds with clean water, how to stretch her stiff limbs, how to eat properly again without hurting herself. Each day she grew a little stronger. Though her heart still carried fear, she struggled to trust. Sometimes, when he approached too quickly, she would flinch, expecting a blow. Sometimes, when he offered her food, she would hesitate, waiting for mockery. Daniel never scolded her for this. He understood. Instead, he spoke gently, reminding her, "You don't need to be afraid anymore." Little by little, she began to believe him. She found herself watching the way he worked, how he built the fire, how he spoke with calmness, how he treated even small things with respect. Slowly, her heart softened. The walls she had built around herself began to crack. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she whispered, "Why do you not call me names like the others?" Daniel looked at her seriously. "Because you are not what they said. You are not dirt. You are a person with worth, with dignity, and nothing they said can change that." Her eyes filled with tears. She turned her face away, but he noticed. For the first time in many years, someone had spoken to her as if she mattered. That night, as she lay under the blanket, she thought of his words again and again. She was not dirt. She was not worthless. Perhaps she could begin to believe it. It would take time for trust to grow, but Daniel's patience was endless. He never hurried her, never demanded more than she could give. His bravery had freed her, but his kindness was slowly teaching her to live again. And though she did not yet know it, her life was only at the beginning of a new journey, one where freedom was no longer a dream but a reality within her grasp. The morning air was fresh and cool when Alina stepped outside the small shelter with Daniel. The stream nearby sparkled under the sunlight, and the gentle sound of running water filled the quiet. She stood uncertainly at the doorway, her thin frame wrapped in the blanket he had given her. For the first time in years, there were no chains on her wrists or ankles. The ground beneath her feet felt different now, softer, freer. Daniel noticed the way she stood, hesitant but curious. "You can walk where you want now," he said gently. "No one will stop you. No one will drag you back." The words settled in her heart like a distant melody she had almost forgotten. She looked down at her feet and slowly took a step forward. Her legs were weak, but the earth was steady beneath her. Each step felt like a victory, though small. She walked toward the stream and dipped her fingers into the cool water. The simple touch of freedom made her chest tighten with emotion. For days, Daniel guided her in small steps of freedom. He taught her how to carry water from the stream, how to wash her face, how to cook simple meals with the food he gathered. Each task was ordinary to most people, but for Alina it was new and strange. She had lived so long without choice that even deciding when to eat felt overwhelming. Yet Daniel's patience never wavered. He reminded her gently, "You don't have to be afraid of making mistakes. Freedom is learning, one step at a time." At night they sat by the fire, and Daniel sometimes told stories of places he had seen. He spoke of wide fields filled with golden wheat, mountains that touched the sky, and villages where people welcomed travelers with warm bread and smiles. Alina listened quietly, her eyes wide. To her, such places sounded like dreams. She wondered if she would ever see them. But not everything was easy. Trust did not come quickly. Sometimes when Daniel's shadow fell across her suddenly, her body would tense, remembering old cruelties. Sometimes when she woke in the middle of the night, she expected to hear harsh laughter or feel the bite of a chain again. Daniel never grew angry at her fear. He only said softly, "You're safe now. No one will harm you while I am here." His calm words were like a shield around her heart. As days turned into weeks, Alina grew stronger. She could walk farther, carry more, and her cheeks began to regain color. Yet freedom also brought challenges. One afternoon, Daniel decided to take her into a nearby village to buy supplies. Alina's heart raced at the thought. The village was filled with strangers, and she feared their eyes, their whispers. When they entered the village, people quickly noticed her. Some recognized her from the marketplace. They stared, shocked to see her walking beside someone dressed in clean clothes instead of chains. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "Is that her?" one woman whispered. "The chained girl?" Another laughed. "So the fool actually kept her." Alina lowered her head, shame burning her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to return to the safety of the small shelter. But Daniel walked beside her calmly, his stride steady, his head held high. When a man stepped forward and sneered, "Why do you waste your time with her? She's nothing." Daniel stopped and looked at him with sharp eyes. "She is not nothing," Daniel said firmly, his voice carrying across the crowd. "She is worth more than your cruel words could ever measure." The crowd grew silent. No one had ever defended her like that. Alina's heart trembled. She glanced up at Daniel, seeing the fire in his eyes. For the first time, she felt not just safe but protected. Still, not everyone accepted her presence. Some mocked quietly as they passed. Others shook their heads in disbelief, yet Daniel ignored them all, focusing only on what they needed. When he bought bread and cloth, he made sure to include something small for her, a piece of ribbon for her hair, a simple gift but filled with meaning. Alina stared at it with tears in her eyes, unable to speak. She had not been given a gift in years. On the way back, she whispered, "Why do you defend me? Why do you care what they say?" Daniel looked at her seriously. "Because their words are lies, and lies should never be stronger than the truth. You are alive, you are free, and you are worthy of respect. Don't ever forget that." Her heart swelled with emotions she could not name. For so long she had believed the cruel voices. But Daniel's words were like seeds planted in the soil of her heart, beginning to grow. The days that followed were filled with both progress and trials. Alina learned to walk farther into the fields, to gather herbs, to cook small meals by herself. Each accomplishment filled her with a quiet pride. But sometimes fear returned. At night, nightmares haunted her. She dreamed of chains tightening again, of laughter that mocked her. She woke trembling, her breath quick and shallow. Daniel would wake too, his voice calm and steady. "You're safe," he would remind her. "It's only a dream. The past cannot bind you anymore." Slowly, she began to believe him. One afternoon, as they walked along a path outside the village, a group of men approached. They were the same ones who had mocked her in the marketplace. Their eyes narrowed as they saw her walking freely. "So," one of them sneered, "the chained girl thinks she's free now? Did he tell you that you're special? Don't believe him. You'll always be what you were." Alina froze, her heart pounding. The cruel words stabbed into her chest. She lowered her head, trembling. But Daniel stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "She is not what you say," he said firmly. "She is stronger than you can imagine, and she will not go back to what you want her to be." The men laughed, but when Daniel's steady eyes met theirs, they grew quiet. There was strength in his presence that words alone could not challenge. He led Alina away, ignoring their sneers. As they walked, Alina whispered, "Why do their words still hurt so much?" Daniel glanced at her with gentleness. "Because you remember the years when you had no voice. But now you have a choice. Their voices don't decide who you are. You decide that." His words struck deep. She walked quietly beside him, thinking about them long into the night. For the first time, she began to wonder, could she really choose who she was? Could she really build a new life? The answer did not come easily, but she felt the first sparks of courage. She was learning not only to survive, but to live. The journey to freedom was not simple. Each day carried challenges. Some people doubted her, some mocked her, some tried to remind her of her past. But with Daniel's steady presence, she began to face them with growing strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Alina stood at the edge of the stream. The water reflected her face, no longer empty and hopeless, but filled with new light. She touched her reflection gently, whispering to herself, "I am free." Daniel stood behind her, watching quietly. He did not need to say anything. Her words were proof enough that her heart was beginning to believe in freedom. The chains had been broken, but now she was learning to walk with her own steps, to lift her own voice, to embrace the life she deserved. And though the journey ahead would not be easy, she no longer faced it alone. The days slowly turned into weeks, and the weeks quietly shaped themselves into months. With each passing day, Alina was no longer the fragile woman who had once sat in chains at the corner of the marketplace. Her steps had grown steadier, her body stronger, and her heart more alive. The fire that had been dimmed for so many years was beginning to glow again. The small shelter where she had first tasted freedom became a place of growth. Daniel continued to guide her, but now she was no longer afraid of every shadow or every sound. She learned how to cook meals on her own, how to carry firewood, how to gather herbs and prepare them for medicine. These simple acts gave her pride. They reminded her that she was capable, that she could stand as a person of worth. Alina also began to speak more. At first, her voice was soft, hesitant, as if she feared someone would silence her. But Daniel listened patiently to every word, never interrupting, never mocking. He treated her words as valuable, and in time she grew braver. She told him pieces of her past, the pain she had endured, the years of silence. She spoke of her dreams too, dreams she once thought had died. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she whispered, "I used to dream of walking in a field without chains, of hearing the wind and feeling free. I never thought it would happen, but now, It feels real. Daniel smiled softly. That dream belongs to you, and now no one can take it away again. Her heart swelled at his words. She knew that without his courage, she might never have tasted freedom. But she also realized something else. The journey was no longer just about being rescued. It was about what she would do with her new life. The turning point came one morning when they returned to the village for supplies. The same people who had once mocked her now looked at her differently. She no longer walked with her head down. She walked with quiet dignity, her steps strong, her shoulders straight. The villagers noticed the change. Whispers filled the air again. But this time there was less laughter and more surprise. "Is that really her?" a woman murmured. "She looks different," another said. "Maybe the stranger wasn't a fool after all," an older man admitted quietly. Alina heard their voices, but instead of shrinking back, she lifted her chin. Their words no longer chained her. She knew who she was becoming, and no cruel voice could steal that truth. Inside the bakery, when Daniel bought bread, the baker himself looked at Alina with respect. He handed her a small loaf separately, saying, "This one is for you." For a moment, Alina froze, unsure how to respond. But then she accepted it with a small smile and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first time in years someone outside Daniel had shown her kindness. As they left, Daniel looked at her proudly. "You see, the world is beginning to notice your strength." Her eyes filled with emotion. Maybe I can help others one day. Others who feel trapped like I was. That thought stayed with her. Over the next weeks, Alina began to step out more. She visited the village with Daniel and offered to help mothers carry water or children gather firewood. At first, people were hesitant, unsure if they could trust her, but her sincerity was clear. Slowly, they accepted her presence. Children began to smile at her instead of throwing stones. Women spoke with her about simple things like cooking or mending clothes. Alina was no longer invisible. She was becoming part of the world again. One evening, a young girl from the village followed Alina to the stream. She looked up at her with wide eyes and asked, "Is it true you were once chained?" Alina paused, her heart tightening. She looked at the girl's innocent face and then nodded gently. "Yes," she said softly, "but not anymore. Now I am free." The girl's eyes sparkled with wonder. "You're very brave," she whispered before running back to her family. Alina stood there, her reflection shining in the water. For years she had thought of herself as weak, broken, unworthy. But now a child called her brave. For the first time she truly believed it. Daniel noticed her growth with quiet pride. He did not claim her strength as his own achievement. He knew he had simply opened the door. She had walked through it herself. Each day he watched her transformation, and it gave him hope that even the deepest wounds could heal. But challenges still came. Some people in nearby villages who had never seen her transformation still mocked when they heard her story. One man sneered, "A chain cannot be erased. A past like hers stays forever." Alina heard those words and felt the old sting of shame. But this time she did not lower her head. She looked the man in the eye and said calmly, "The past is part of me, but it does not decide who I am today." The man was stunned into silence. Daniel, standing beside her, felt a deep respect. She had found her voice at last. Months later, Alina began to do more than just live her own life. She started helping those who were suffering in silence. When she saw a child mocked for being poor, she knelt down and spoke kindly, reminding them of their worth. When she met a woman who had lost her family, she offered comfort, saying, "I know what it feels like to be broken, but you can stand again." Her words carried power because they came from experience. The villagers began to admire her. They no longer saw her as the girl in chains, but as a woman of courage. People started to say, "If she can rise, then so can we." She became a quiet symbol of hope, proof that dignity could be restored even after the harshest of trials. Daniel continued to walk beside her, but now he no longer needed to shield her at every step. She had learned to stand tall on her own. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with gold, Daniel said, "You don't need me to protect you anymore. You have found your own strength." Alina looked at him with grateful eyes. "But I will always be thankful that you showed me where to begin." Together, they stood by the stream, watching the reflection of the sky. Alina reached down, touching the water gently. She remembered the chains, the laughter of cruelty, the endless nights of silence. But those memories no longer held her captive. They were part of her story, yes, but not the ending. Now her story was about freedom, dignity, and courage. She had been treated like dirt, but she had risen from the ground stronger than ever. She had been chained, but now she walked freely, her steps carrying hope not only for herself but for others who needed it. The cruel ones who once mocked her could no longer hold power over her. Their voices had faded, replaced by her own. And in the hearts of those who knew her, Alina's name no longer carried shame but strength. The woman who once sat silently in chains was gone. In her place stood a free woman, alive, dignified, and unbroken. And as the stars filled the sky that night, Alina whispered to herself, with a voice steady and strong, "I am free. I am worthy. I am alive." Her journey was not only survival, it was transformation. And from that day forward, her life was not defined by what she had suffered, but by the courage she found to rise above it.